Go ahead.
Okay, item 2, first sentence, the planning and zoning administrator put together a document, take out one.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
And then on the same page at the bottom, or the last paragraph at the bottom, David and Vinnie believe that if a resident, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
these are just like.
Yes, if a resident.
Needed to live, needed a live-in caregiver, yeah,
Oh.
live-in would be a dash.
Yeah. And then page 2, second paragraph, I think the next to the last sentence, David Henry stated that he felt it was not difficult to look at the neighboring buildings and design a building to fit
Yeah,
in.
I think I meant to say your building to fit in, but a building works.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And then, same page, third from the paragraph from the bottom, he asked about disabled persons living in a senior housing development. John noted that under federal guidelines, a disabled person of any, I think we can just take out that.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, last paragraph, in the big one, Brett stated that he has looked at the numbers. And, yeah, and then just an S, excuse me, on the side of one of the buildings, it just has an S, we should put an S on buildings. At the Dartmouth School.
You got any? Yes, I do. Ray Clark is listed twice as a member of the public.
Oh, very good.
I
That was the other
Make
Ray.
sure I got him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd
Or the
like,
brother Ray.
I'd like to change the wording of the sentence, second paragraph, on page 2, second paragraph, second sentence. I'd like it to read, he asked what objective criteria would the board use to determine whether the proposal met the requirements?
I don't know where you're.
Where you-
So it says, actually, that's wrong, it's the third sentence in that second paragraph. It
In the
starts out, he
second-
could not understand.
What starts the paragraph, Rich?
Rich believed that it
Okay,
should be open.
okay.
Right,
So
third
it's-
sentence there, currently starts out, he could not understand. I asked that entire sentence to be replaced with, he asked what objective criteria would the board use to determine whether the proposal met the requirements?
Does anybody have an objection? Okay.
Can you
Not to be able to interpret this.
give me that language because
Yes,
it's,
I'll write it out. I'll finish with this, I'll write it out and give it to you. In the paragraph talking about reading the letters from Virginia and Mike and also from Helen Thompson, how can the public see those letters that were sent to the board? And is that something we would include? I mean,
We never have.
it's not something, the minutes are not a transcript of the meeting. The minutes are basically the happenings of the meeting.
But maybe the answer to the question is they remain a public record, so
Yeah,
I
they do.
can come in and ask for them.
I do keep a file of.
That's,
Right,
sure you
and that's,
do.
that's usually how we manage that.
And independently, you have your film, so. That's
Although
not,
it's-
not a town record.
It's not a town record, but yes,
you certainly
right,
have.
actually. And so, is there the blanket presumption that anything, letters brought to the board would be available for inspection? I mean, is that just a standing expectation?
Yeah.
If it's an official communication to the town, it's an official public record that needs to be.
If it's sent to an individual,
Sure.
it's not presented to the board,
Right.
it's not.
Of course, right. And so, I'm just clarifying that it's our presumption that these things would be, talk to David and you could get.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Third paragraph from the bottom,
What page?
this is still on page 2. I'd like to suggest we change it to Rusty said that the proposed language was too restrictive. I mean, I think that's,
I don't care.
How was it, doesn't matter.
I think that's fine, we don't need to,
Yeah,
we don't
Need
need
to
to
characterize it.
characterize his comments.
but I think for the next meetings, we should say that Rich complained about the wording.
we'll leave that to David's discretion.
Yeah. Okay,
I get tired of using said or,
I know,
you
I
know,
know.
the same noted, or, so I try to,
noted, stated.
yeah, I try to
Yes, and,
mix it up, and so.
You wanted to
Complaint
have-
was not like a whining complaint, but it was a.
yes, asserted,
Yeah.
I mean, anyway.
I think it was somewhat accurate, but.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be, it can be perceived as loaded,
Yes.
Yeah,
and it doesn't need to be.
Right, no, and but I didn't intend it that way, just
all right,
trying to
so
use a
anything
different.
else?
No, I do not have any.
Okay, now my turn. Yeah, everybody get comfortable. All right. Item 2, the last.
Page?
Item 2.
Oh, you know what, I don't even care, I forget that. Yes, to be for accuracy's sake, when you get down to the board discussed size,
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, 1,200 square feet and one category, that was 1350, because I don't think it was one unit.
Okay.
And the greens, just to keep the tents consistent, the greens had 28 units and 2 available one bedroom units. I'm sorry, the greens had 28 units and 2 available one-bedroom units were listed at 590 square feet. Okay,
So the rest of them, the other 26, could be whatever.
yeah, I don't know what they were.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, no, I do know what the others were, but this was the greens I didn't know. Yeah. All right, then, where it says, John noted that it is not possible to account for every eventuality. He believed that the intent of the amendment is to make senior housing development significantly more likely, is how I would put it.
It's kind of the same.
No, it's actually a little bit different.
Okay.
And then with Ray Clark, I think this is wrong. Ray, as my recollection, was not asking that we make things affordable. I thought he was saying that affordability, making it affordable, was going to be an impediment. He talked about where he donated the land and that they couldn't find somebody. And he said, he was talking about our workforce housing stock as being very adequate. And as I recall, when I pointed out that there was no affordable requirement in here, he said, okay, well, that clears that up. Does anybody else remember that?
There was that part of the discussion, I don't have a clear recollection. I mean, if we wanna not, if we wanna take words out of Ray's mouth.
Well, he didn't say that,
Yeah,
is what I'm saying.
right.
I feel like this is putting words
So
in.
just take out he also believed that affordability should be addressed, and that will, just take it out of the,
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, just under that paragraph, John noted that under federal guidelines, that a non-senior disabled person, I don't know if it's of any age, you might have to be 18, I really don't know. But, so I would just say guidelines that a non-senior disabled person qualified, or could qualify for senior housing. And that's it. Okay, so, we have, oh yeah, we have to do,
Yes.
how quickly we forget. I'd like to make a motion to, move the minutes as amended by Tim, Rich, and John. Do I have a second?
Second?
All those in favor? Okay, good. Okay, so let's go on to our main project. And I'd really like to make a lot of progress tonight. Realistically, we have this meeting and
December,
next meeting.
December.
What do you,
Next meeting is going to be busy.
what's next meeting?
You have a lot line adjustment that was submitted. That one should be fairly quick. Between one of your properties and fire station, just swapping.
It's nothing but trouble. I mean, that's not gonna be, I've never had an easy case. This will be.
Yeah, it's just a swap of 0.34 acres to make the fire station property a little more usable,
Yeah.
and the law will be more conforming. So that should be fairly easy. And then there is a informal major subdivision meeting.
Can you hum a few bars?
8 lots off of Goose Pond Road. That just came in today. So they would like to meet with the board to discuss that before they go through with the whole.
Right, well, that's a good idea.
So I have a feeling that between those two, that it's gonna take up a good chunk of,
Well, we might get a little done next time, and then we have December. And then we still have to get it to town council, and then we need to have 2 meetings.
Yeah.
So that gives us time if we finish in December.
First,
well, technically you need one if you don't have any public input that changes it.
But we might,
Right, so you have to leave time for 2.
right?
what's,
Okay.
what's the date has to be for town meeting?
I don't know the exact date, it's gonna be early in February.
Early in February.
Usually it's around the 5th of February. It depends on, it's 90 days before town meeting.
So it would have to be
Or
the
30.
meetings in January would be the public.
It's gotta be 30, I think 30 days. Anyway, there's a, I'll look up and get the exact date. But figure very early in February.
So we need the 2 meetings in January probably
For the hearings.
for the
Yeah.
hearings, yeah. So we have to.
Now, you don't have to necessarily hold the public hearings on your normal meeting nights. You could,
Well, we may,
But there
we
is-
may need to.
yeah, but there is a gap that has to be maintained, a 2-week gap between meetings,
Right.
so.
So if we have the first meeting and somebody brings up something that we feel we need to address, we can just schedule something, 2 weeks, or, well, what would probably be greater than 2 weeks out, and get that taken care of.
Right, and you can go right up to the date that it has to be, the day before you have to submit it, so if
Okay,
it's
so that gives us at least a little.
a little wiggle room.
All right, let's go through, the latest incarnation, and we were working off what you had provided. I saw, Rich, I saw your thing, and basically it looks like a reworking of what you
It's,
brought before, which wasn't supported by anybody on the board.
given the timeline you just expressed, I'm happy to leave that in abeyance.
I think that's a good idea. Okey doke, so let's go through this. I have a lot of changes. I spoke to David and we went over, I guess I should do this first, we went over the viability. And my takeaway from what David and I concluded, going through, looking at different properties on your computer screen and everything with all of our data, is that within the district, 8 to 10 likely to very likely And if we included properties that were partially in the district, 8 to 13, probably, I would say, mostly all.
Now, is that
Likely.
conversions or?
No, these are ones that where you could get,
No.
where you could likely have 10 residences, one way or the other.
Yeah.
A lot of them were new, but not all of them. So it seems viable. I mean, I think that's viable. So does anybody have notes to the senior housing structure that David provided? So I take that as a no.
Well, no, I actually I have some questions.
Okay.
Sorry to be interrupted.
Yeah.
David, when did you send out the most recent rev?
That was, I sent it out, or I gave it out at the last meeting, so you may not have.
Those hard
I did send out a hard copy, earlier this week. Earlier this week, Rich, or-
I'm good.
Okay.
So it's the same one that we talked about
Right,
last.
yeah.
time.
Yeah,
Now, I just missed the last meeting, so
Yeah.
that's why
Right.
I was hunting for it electronically.
okay,
Okay.
go ahead.
Could you characterize what these would look like?
No,
Okay.
You mean the buildings or the?
Yes, I mean, these 8 to 13 possible properties,
You mean where they be?
not so much, what are they gonna look like? They're gonna have multiple homes of up to 1,200? Multiple units?
well, before you ask these questions, why don't we go through, I mean, the things I'm gonna address may answer some of your questions.
Okay, good.
Okay. Hmm?
I mean, one clarifying thing, they could include brand new construction,
Yeah,
and they could include conversion of existing buildings into something different.
and expansions.
And the new construction we're talking about things like all one level versus other options. But, I mean, I don't think that's an answerable
No,
question.
it's not.
Because it really
It
is
depends on the
the
specific.
creativity of somebody proposing something that could be, that the only criteria is it has to fit in generally with
It has to
the
be harmonious to the
character
area.
and scale of the neighborhood.
Okay, I'm gonna go through
Okay,
my
so are
suggestions.
you making amendments to this?
I'm gonna
propose?
propose
Yes,
changes.
okay, go ahead.
Okay. The first thing I'll bring up is we would need to decide whether it would be just the Lyme Common zoning district or the Lyme Common zoning district plus the partials. I have been open to the commercial district too, but nobody else seems to be interested in that. So I'm assuming that those are the two that are possibly supportable. So let's just say that that's something that we're gonna need to decide, whether it's just the Lyme Common zoning district or the Lyme Common zoning district plus.
And that would include, the Lyme Common zoning district would include the lots that just
The
touch
partials.
the partials.
Right, that, basically what would be allowing is, if a lot is partially within the zoning district, then you could use the entire lot
Right.
for
Right.
senior housing. If you're only allowing the portions of a lot within within the Lyme Common District, then it's only within.
But
So-
we're saying, yeah, so we'll include,
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to decide whether we're only going to do the Lyme Common zoning district or the Lyme Common zoning district plus, okay?
Do we need to decide that now or
No,
come back to it?
We'll
Okay.
come back to it, because that's probably be a lengthy discussion, could be. The objectives, I rewrote a little bit. The objective of senior housing is to provide housing that is suitable for the needs of an aging population and will facilitate independent living with an emphasis on safety, accessibility, and the opportunity for integration into the social fabric of the district. I took out with a question mark the adaptability, because I didn't really know what adaptability meant.
I fully admit I
Okay.
plagiarized that language
Okay.
from
So I'll just,
all over the internet,
so I took that out. Senior housing shall be of such design and character so as to be harmonious and consistent with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. Okay, so that's the objective. Any discussion about that?
I'd also be tempted to add it, and also as described in the master plan.
And that would be in connection to
Just
what?
with the same sentence that you just finished. Read me your last.
Senior housing shall be of such design and character so as to be harmonious and consistent with the character of the surrounding neighborhood.
Or as described in the master plan, but that's,
The senior housing isn't specifically defined in the master plan, it's
Yeah.
something that the board had talked about. I think you could very much say that it has to meet the goals of the master plan or the vision of the master plan.
yeah, that's what I actually had pulled up in front of me, and that's what I was trying to do, was tie it to,
Okay.
in chapter 2, to the vision of what the Lyme Common Village.
So what would be a good way?
Well, maybe just to front another sentence,
uh,
then that
Meet the
the
goals.
development would coincide with or support the vision as described in the master plan.
All right, so I'm just gonna put plus master plan and we'll wordsmith that.
Something like that.
Okay.
Kevin, I'll ask, since you've got the master plan open there, are there objective criteria there that a developer could look at and say, yes, indeed, I meet these? It would be,
Well, I don't think there are in the master plan, because the master plan is more general.
Right.
I mean,
And supports the more specific ordinances. The ordinances would have, would be more,
well, and then that goes to the question that I put into the minutes last time. What, are there objective criteria that developers
okay,
can lean on?
so let's say that for the dimensional control part, because I think that's the part where you were concerned with.
I'm concerned with language that talks about the character of the
Oh,
village
okay.
and all.
From my point of view, that's just, I'm not supporting anything that doesn't say that. And it's in senior housing and all sorts of articles throughout the state.
Mhm.
It's nothing unusual, and frankly, I think we would be run out of town if we didn't do that. You're gonna build something, development with 10 senior housing units in the Lyme Common District, and you're gonna not demand that it's harmonious?
Yeah.
And
What was the wording in some of the other ones, John? I think they were sort of to the point of consistent with the master plan or consistent with the development within the
Well,
community. I mean, there's.
That's what I said. Senior housing shall be of such design and character so as to be harmonious and consistent. Actually, I used two characters. Consistent with the character of the surrounding neighborhood.
Right.
So I understand that's a concern of yours with this language. It's not for me at all.
I think the discussion is, it looks like Rich is looking for something very quantitative and really the
Well,
wording that.
this board has in the past been very quantitative, and a lot of the ordinance says that the board may permit certain things depending on
Right.
the character of the neighborhood, and every word that we write here is a disincentive. I just want, I wanna be
That's your
clear
opinion.
about that.
I consider this quite a big incentive.
It may be a disincentive to a developer, it may be.
And that would be good.
And that may be true. The question then becomes.
I don't think it's a disincentive
Well,
to it.
no, the question really becomes, is it a disincentive for the residents of Lyme?
It's
And so that's what this board has to do, is make sure that it's
Right.
representing what, in my view, gets represented or discussed in the master plan, that it's consistent with the characteristics of the village. So that's what, I get the point. That may-
And we did too, we discussed it last time a little bit, Kevin. that the problem is, from a policy standpoint, that either you say, we're gonna be totally flexible and let them decide, and then we'll have to use whatever tools we have during site plan review or whatever, which will be slim to none
Yeah.
at that point. Or you start getting super prescriptive. This type of siding, the pitch of the roof can't be greater than this, you know, it has to be
Like the-
Gothic or neo-Gothic or whatever. You have to get so specific that you can't, you have to at some point trust people to say, this is close. Because otherwise, somebody can come in and put in a Soviet concrete gulag barracks and say,
Flat roof, yeah.
that's good enough, it's cheap, you know, anything else is a disincentive, and it's like, you get run out on a rail.
The thing is that the Lyme Common District varies
Right.
quite a bit. If you look around the common, you have very old
Exactly.
colonial style houses. You know, you go across the street here and your building fits in with everything, but it's not quite that same style. You look at the barn behind the red barn, it has a little different look and feel. You go up to High Street, you're gonna find houses that are more 40s, 50s, 60s. Some are older, but the character changes, and so I don't think you can say it will have these characteristics
Right.
because of that varying amount of character within the Lyme Common.
And to address the issue, you know, maybe I misunderstood you, but to address the issue of disincentives, what I'm looking for in this ordinance is that this is an incentive for more, we don't have any, dedicated senior housing, on balance. And on balance is the key word. That any kind of ordinance is a balance between encouraging development and being respectful of the people who already live in that area and of the town in general.
Right. Yeah, I think it's true that we can't, we couldn't just let the developer build anything, because, you know, people aren't gonna vote for that either, I don't think. And it has to, you know,
I mean,
it has to be.
mhm. I think I've said my say.
Okay.
Me too.
Everybody's spoken out. Okay, B, I would add, after it says age 62 or older, where one resident must be age 62, no, okay. All residential, I'll just read the whole thing. All residential units will be limited to 2 residents where one resident must be age 62 or older, or 3 if the third is a caregiver who is 18 years of age or older.
Or 3 residents if one is a caregiver.
That's fine. You mean as opposed to a third resident?
Maybe I misheard.
Okay, age 62 or older, or 3,
I'd say residents.
Okay.
If,
3 residents if a third. That's good.
As a caregiver, greater than 18 years of age.
Or a third resident, how would you say that?
If the third resident is a caregiver.
Who is 18 years or older?
If the third resident is a caregiver.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay,
And you're saying he's a caregiver and must be 18 years.
who is 18 years of age or older?
Okay.
Okay? Any more on that?
I might note that there's another town that said 62 and older was elderly housing, and they drew the distinction between that and senior housing, that was 55 and older.
I don't feel strongly about it.
So, we change this to say elderly housing?
what is the board
Yeah.
wanna do?
Matters.
I don't think it matters. What's, yes, sir?
If there's a definition that somebody's floating, all of a sudden it's gonna make a difference. And somebody with a lawyer will make a difference later.
Yeah, I think with senior, we're defining what we mean by senior. If we start using elderly,
I mean, another town did it, it's.
yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah.
I think for consistency, we're calling it a senior housing ordinance, and we're defining
Right.
throughout the ordinance what senior
Mhm.
is, what, so, is, what's the board's pleasure? I would just stick with the senior.
I would stay with the.
Okay.
That's,
Okay, so we have residential units may be no larger than 1,200 square feet. So I'm getting ready for the screams and howls on this one. So residential units may be no larger than 1,200 square feet and shall have a maximum average size of 900 square feet.
Maximum average.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the reasoning behind that is twofold. I looked through a lot of the local senior projects, and I looked at the full-service ones and the non-full-service ones. And the one I looked at Quail Hollow, the Greens, I think Quail Hollow, yeah, you want,
I think I'm gonna make life easier for you.
okay, go ahead.
The reality is that's no hardship for anybody, because I have 750 square foot houses that'll have a single mother and two kids live in
Exactly.
them. So,
And-
you know, it's
and really-
not an issue.
The thinking behind it is, if we're gonna have a maximum of 1,200, and we're gonna have to get to a maximum size of the gross building footprint at some point, if everything's gonna be 1,200 feet, you're gonna be at 12,000, and that's without any common area, that, you know, so we're just starting to get,
You'll get into lot coverage issues,
Just
you'll get in,
enormous.
those will be the things that constrain it from being that big necessarily.
exactly.
The other way of looking at it is when a guy hits up a wall with its 12 units and lot coverage and sewage loading, he has a choice to back it off to smaller units so that he can then
Right.
meet maybe the 10 threshold if they choose.
Right, and I know we're not making it affordable, but I think that it would tend to make it more affordable, if this is the average size.
I don't think it's a problem.
No? No? All right, well, anyway,
A wordsmithing thing is, rather than say a maximum average size, I think you should say we'll have an average size no greater than 900 feet. 'Cause
Very
the
good.
average is the
average size no greater,
No greater than
that's
that.
great.
So somebody could build 10 units that were 550 square feet?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Sure.
whatever.
okay. In D, common areas may be allowed, and I'd add, and shall not be counted towards residential unit square footage, just to make that completely clear.
And then I had mentioned, while we're talking common areas, I also mentioned storage or garages. Should we have should we put that in the same D or make it a separate one?
No, let's keep the alphabet limited. So common areas,
And
storage,
and garage.
and garage space.
None of those count towards those numbers.
Right.
Um,
Now, the residential unit size is strictly the size of the unit, is what I'm trying to say. Okay?
So, can we talk about the math here?
Yeah.
So if we've got 10 units at an average of 900 square feet, a garage is 200 square feet?
Single?
Single garage is 200 square feet?
12.
10 by 10 by 20?
360, 300,
300? Okay,
probably,
so
For two cars,
one.
for one?
okay, so
You
300.
don't wanna bang doors, you need 12 foot wide.
Okay.
A lot of cars, if they have a full-size car, it would be, 24 feet or something like
Okay,
that.
So
Maybe
12 by
a little.
24 would be,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Right, and then, how much storage do people want? 100 square feet, 200 square feet? I mean,
To me, you know, it should be, you know, limited by the, again, the lot. You know, if you wanna, if you have a lot that you don't have a lot of space on, you may not have space for a garage, and your storage may be very limited. You may have a basement area that you provide, that storage, which would be part of your common area. And so I'm not sure putting a limit on any of that, other than what would fit on the lot.
And you're gonna run up to coverage constraints
Right.
at some point, it's just that they won't count towards septic.
Right.
What when we looked at the various properties, we looked at parking.
Yep.
And whether, we didn't do measurements, but are we gonna be able to get parking on here for 10? And the conclusion was that we could.
Yes.
If there's a common area that has a kitchen and restrooms, does that count as if it was a dwelling from a septic standpoint?
No, I can't directly answer, but my opinion, let's put it that way, is no, it's the body count, and it's the bedroom
It's
count.
gonna be your bedrooms or where your counts are. They may, if you are serving meals, then they will count it. If it is just a common space that is available, but all the other units have their own kitchen facilities,
It's just an ancillary.
it's just an ancillary, they don't, it's like, you know, bathrooms, you can take and if you have a bunch of outbuildings on your property, you can put a bathroom in every single one of those, tie it into your septic system, and the state is going to consider it, the septic sized for the number of bedrooms, not the bathrooms. You know, assuming that you have X number of people, doesn't matter how many bathrooms, they're only gonna use so much water. I mean, that's the
way it works.
Yeah,
It's
it's,
more occasional,
it's
it's considered to be occasional use as opposed to.
right, well, you know, you're gonna use one bathroom or the other, you're not gonna be, you know,
Right.
there's only so much output.
Yeah, or occasional guests.
Yeah.
It becomes its own limiting factor again, though, because when they go in, somebody comes in for a common restaurant, dining area and kitchen, it becomes part of the sewage loading question, which solves itself basically because of the lot constraints anyway,
Okay.
I would
Okay,
think.
I just didn't know
Yeah.
whether you need to think about it separately. So, thank you.
Good question.
I'm smarter now, thank you. I like that.
Yeah,
Well, I'm curious, I'm just wondering, so if I was building and my residential unit was 1,200 square foot, then I decided that I would have a 10 by 10 storage space associated with the unit,
I don't think it's necessarily that you'd have it.
or 12 by 12 associated with the unit, and, you know, I'm just saying, if I was marketing,
I don't think,
does it matter? I mean, because then the size of the building grows.
well,
Right, well,
but-
either you size that your building grows, or you find some place within that building to put that.
Basement. or-
Yeah, I lived in an apartment building where you had to go outside and down,
Right.
and one door was the basement, one door was
Yeah.
the laundry.
I guess what I'm really challenging myself to make sure I'm clear is, make sure we're not missing something, is that somehow doesn't get abused.
Well, there's
That
no,
the common
the
storage
the
theory,
storage is not,
that the space doesn't
So you're
get.
saying somebody could add 100 square feet onto every
no,
unit?
no, that does, it's not how it's gonna work,
Well,
because,
I
when
know
we
that's
get to
not-
the dimensional controls,
Yeah,
That would
that's gonna be limiting.
dominate the size of the total footprint in the
Yeah.
building.
your building would be limited, so.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is I move into this unit and I get 1,200 feet, and they gave me a 100-foot storage area that happens to be attached to it, and there's a doorway, and the next thing you know, it's another bedroom for me.
that's
And-
not what we're saying.
No, I know it's
I know
not
it's not
what
what
you're
we're
saying,
saying,
but that's
But
where it goes.
But they
Right.
they could, if somebody wanted to do that, they're using up their square footage, they're not gonna get 10 units.
No, we're talking about after the fact. This building is all up,
Okay,
and it has a 100-foot storage area, and the next thing you know, I got somebody, a caregiver living in there,
Or
or
two.
extra den or a TV room, and that's not what you're saying.
Well, then we say detached storage.
I'm just worried about somehow
Okay.
the wording being not, I understood what you meant, but I'm concerned
I
about
think it,
later on.
it needs to specifically say that it can't be for, you know, not, I'm not sure of the wording of it, but not for living purposes,
Inhabitable.
let's say.
Yeah.
It's strictly storage.
Non-inhabitable
Non-inhabitable
storage
storage.
space?
But we're still.
Yeah.
only
Because otherwise it will get,
That's,
it will.
Well,
But we're
it's,
still only gonna have 3 people per unit.
Yeah, but they'd
Up
be
to
happy
3
to have
people
a
per
2,000-foot unit, so there's another 100 feet. You see what I'm saying?
just
And I
made,
agree with
you
what he's
just made
saying.
my den.
Okay, so we can take out the reference to storage.
Or make it non-inhabitable, or, I mean, I thought conceptually garage storage made sense. I'm just trying to make sure that.
Okay, no, this is great, this is exactly what we
Yeah.
should be doing.
I mean, it's important to think of ways people can bend the rules,
How about-
because they will.
say unheated storage.
Or just uninhabitable, because I might want to store my fur,
Yeah.
fur coat.
Right, because a lot of people need heated storage for their.
If it's within the building, it becomes problematic anyway because of the,
Yeah.
even though that area will affect.
The main point to do this, we're trying to improve the affordability of the units, but, to your point, without making it tempting for people to bend it into a retirement home or something that comes under the wire so the kids can come home and live there, or half the year,
All right, so-
or rent it out, or something else.
So how do we wanna phrase it?
Um,
Not, I'll tell you, you know, I'm worried about that stuff too, but when we're describing residential units, maybe no larger than 1,200 square feet, and you rent or buy the residential unit, well, I mean, if we say uninhabitable, and who's gonna be living in the garage?
When you're through the site plan, you know, if you see a storage that's connected, you say,
Or we can just say detached storage.
yeah,
I mean, don't
that's
say
how I-
detached, because then you're saying that
It
it's,
could still be in the same building.
right, I don't see any reason, you know, where if you have a basement area that has storage units,
You might even just used strictly for storage and not for any form of living quarters or something.
the only thing that worries about me is that, you know, somebody builds in a huge closet and say it's storage, so it's not part of your residential square footage.
That was one of the.
But how would that
Yeah,
work?
Well, if you have it, you know,
So,
saying storage is, not part of your residential 1,200, then there could be an argument saying that a large walk-in closet is storage and not, so you just add in.
Maybe we should just take storage,
Yeah.
you know, not,
Yeah.
let's just not
There's
talk
storage
about.
facilities all up and down the river.
Yeah, and
You
if,
can
pe-
rent
and
storage
if
anywhere you
the,
want.
if the builder wants to have storage, we're not gonna stop the builder from having storage as long as it's consistent, let's just,
well, clearly not inhabitable, I mean, and maybe we don't want to address it.
maybe we don't wanna do
Yeah, well,
this.
to me, you know, inhabitable is, you know, again, it's subjective as far as, but what I'm saying, you know, again, you could have a large walk-in closet,
Yeah, you're.
and say it's
you're-
not
you're-
inhabitable.
You're right.
but,
Well, no, I was, my thought of storage was clearly outside the envelope of your unit.
right, when that.
That's And whether
Yeah,
it's-
but
whether it's-
you're absolutely correct, if somebody would come in, have the thing all designed, and then they would say, oh, no, these don't count because they're storage. And you say, yeah, but you enter them through your bedroom.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, because all they have to do is on the plan, say storage and not closet.
Okay,
And-
let's just
yeah.
take storage out,
Yeah.
Okay.
and, that would leave us with common areas and garage space.
Yeah.
So, the reason that I asked the question was a math question.
Yeah.
That, so we got a 900 average average of 900 square foot per unit, 300 square feet for the garage. How much do we want to allow for common space, for dining rooms, for kitchens, for
Well, I
meeting
think that's
rooms,
something
that kind of
we're
thing,
gonna have to answer that question.
right? And, I mean, regrettably, I don't have a good number.
But the,
I think, again, it's going to be self-regulating
yeah,
with building footprint, because.
Oh, but, Mike, the place I'm going with this is this is where the math comes in. Okay, so, if you had 10 units with a 900 square foot unit and 300 square feet, that's 1,200 square feet of lot coverage. You need a bunch of common space, is that a like amount?
That's what we need to address. When I'm gonna come to the
You're gonna
dimensional
come to that?
controls. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
all right,
next.
good.
And we're, yeah,
I think somebody sort of said it's a problem that solves itself, because when you get to the park you're about to go to, maximum building size or the lot constraints
Mhm, mhm.
themselves, then Joe Builder's gonna decide, well, I really don't wanna give him a garage, I'd rather have that space used for an extra unit or an exercise room or a dining area. And the next guy might say, no, I don't want those things, I'd rather they had a garage.
right.
This will sort itself out, and when you have your lot constraint,
Mhm.
lot coverage constraints, setbacks, which I think you're getting to. And-
Yeah, so, and this is,
maximum.
and Rich, you
Go
raised
ahead.
this last time, and I really, you wanted more, specific criteria. And I was trying to come up with it, and as I was doing it, I was realizing that I was gonna keep running into trouble because of the variability of all the sites that might be used. So I went back to what David had put in there, pretty much. But I did think that we should probably make have a limit on a maximum size on how big the thing can be.
Building footprint.
Yeah, the gross footprint. But otherwise, it's really, it demands flexibility. And the board's gonna have to, it's just like in a lot of the parts of the ordinance, you're gonna have to use judgment. But the way that David had it here, dimensional controls, lot coverage, building footprint, property and road setbacks, and gross floor area shall be established by the planning board through site plan review, based on the character of the land and neighborhood, and I would add, and the objectives of Article 13, which is this article.
Mhm.
The adequacy of the soils to support on-site wastewater disposal and wells, safety of access, and traffic circulation, and other issues relating to the future use and enjoyment of the property. I'm open to, considering other specific criteria if it's workable, but I couldn't come up with any.
So in this situation, a developer could come with a proposal for a 20,000 square foot building with 10 units.
Well,
I mean, I'm just saying.
if
could
we
do that.
didn't make a maximum
Right.
limitation,
That's my point.
Yeah.
So he could come to the planning board and say, I
Yeah.
wanna build a 20,000 or 22,000 square foot building.
40,000.
Yeah, whatever, cause I'm gonna have all these huge open areas and all stuff. So then it would go through site plan review and we'd have to decide whether that was in keeping with the common or not.
And I think not only with the common, within the area of the common, that it's,
And yeah,
Right, but so would it be possible to just look at the common? I mean, we know pretty much all these sites and say, what's the maximum size building?
well, I
that
think
might
we
live
need,
there?
I think we need to say what the
Yeah,
maximum size
Based
should be.
on the actual
So
site.
what it is, what is it now, 6,000? Is that right? Yeah, so I mean, in,
Gross floor area.
yeah, gross floor. So it's 6,000 now, so, if we doubled that, that's 12,000, which wouldn't mean that you would get it, but it means that you could get it.
Right. How big is Green Mountain Studio?
14.
He tells me 14.
The
I think he's
footprint.
probably
The
right.
footprint is 14.
On the ground.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Just the.
On the ground.
Wow.
But you're gonna be in those numbers, because if you take your 900 square feet times 10, so your 9,000 square feet, probably not big enough, but I just throw in 800 square feet for a kitchen and a dining area and a little bit more, and you're in, 10,000 feet,
Right.
whatever it was.
Right,
I think you need a ceiling of probably 12,000 feet on the ground,
that's what I was,
Yeah.
and
Do you
that
think
really
it-
came out of, that,
do you think that's reasonable,
I do,
12,000?
yeah.
yeah, and it's.
But that comes all the way back to what we were talking about before, when we were talking about maximum of 1,200 square foot units. Average it to 9 or whatever,
Okay.
well, that lets somebody play back and forth, you know.
Right.
It gives, it
You got
gives some
porch areas,
play.
you're gonna have to have a porch or it's not gonna fit anyway. So all those go to square footage, I think.
No,
Yes, a porch, if it's.
gross, for the gross, yeah,
For
not
a
for the
building
living space.
footprint, if you have a roof over it, it counts as part of the footprint. If it's just an open deck, then it's considered just a standalone structure that it takes up lot coverage.
Okay. So, yeah, I had written down 12,000.
Mhm.
And how does everybody feel about 12,000?
It sounds reasonable, that's doubling.
That would assume that everything's on one level.
No, we haven't gotten there yet.
So if
That's
it's
the
not on
footprint.
one
That's the
level,
footprint.
Wait, are we talking, I'm not sure we're talking about the same
I
thing.
think we were talking about footprint.
Yeah, we're talking about
And-
footprint.
Oh,
and if
just
you got-
footprint?
Yeah,
Oh,
footprint.
So now you could go times 2.
Well, no, because you're gonna run into these other problems where you can only have units so big, and 900 square foot average. And, you know, it's gonna be a point of diminishing return because the income's off the unit. And just because you put in a gymnasium there, doesn't mean you can charge any more for your unit. You're gonna have, there's gonna be a cost control that comes into who's
Right.
gonna build it.
Well, I mean, you know, the other thing we could do, I don't think you're gonna like this, but the other, we could say you get a 12,000 footprint, but you also have a 12,000 square foot gross floor area. So if
I think
some,
that's reasonable.
so if somebody wants to build a smaller footprint, they can use it on the
I
second
fully
floor.
agree with that.
6,000 times 2.
No, yeah, 6,000 times two.
Right.
So, and that was sort of my point when I was thinking earlier, was, does this mean 12,000 times 2?
No.
12,000 feet on the ground, 12,000 feet maximum floor space.
Both, yeah.
Yeah.
That's more definitive.
Okay.
Because the way it was first written, I was thinking or hearing
Yeah,
12,000
I
times
was too,
You know, so-
once I understood what.
12,000 on the
Right, and that's
floor,
just gonna be too big.
12,000 on the
Well,
second.
part of that is almost redundant, but I think for clarity and somebody coming after you with a lawyer, you probably want them both stated,
I agree.
because somebody will take it apart.
Cause you probably wanna what?
You want it
Just have-
stated both ways.
Just-
Oh, yeah,
Because
yeah.
you could just say, you know, 12,000 maximum floor area, and somebody with an attorney's gonna take it apart somehow, because
Right,
you didn't say
right.
it the other way.
So we're saying footprint and gross,
Yeah.
and gross floor area.
but my question was, but that doesn't constrain them to be all on one floor necessarily.
No,
Right.
Which we talked about as being, should these units all be, should the residential units be
well,
required?
that's
to be
under
on the single
F,
floor?
right, we'll get to
We'll
F.
get there, okay.
Yeah.
So gross floor area and building footprint shall not exceed 12,000 square feet.
Okay, so just so you can, right now, the maximum building foot, the square foot for footprint is 4,500 in Lyme Common. So your,
No, it's not 6,000.
no, gross floor area is 6,000. So, okay, 2 floors, 6,000, 4,500 is your maximum, so it is,
This is
Right.
a huge,
it is, and I'm not.
But if you had a
saying-
bare lot, you know.
Right.
It's.
Or
but-
made
but
a,
one
or
of the
made a
things-
bare lot.
Was that, or
Or
made it?
made a bare
yeah.
lot.
But one of the things, and I haven't thought this through, is let's say you have a pre-existing building, and yes, I haven't thought this through yet, but if you had 6,000 feet on 2 floors, and say 3,000 feet on the ground, I haven't thought through how this all sugars out, what it really leaves. I guess it leaves you with the ability to put a 6,000 foot senior housing additional building on that property.
Okay.
And then you'd still be constrained by septic and all
Septic
the other
and-
things, so
and-
it's probably doable, yeah. So somebody that had an existing building would still entertain putting another building up for senior housing.
you mean a separate building?
Right,
If they had.
yeah, if they had a
qualified.
house that had 6,000 square feet of
Well,
living.
I mean,
Right.
I guess, so you're saying you could have two,
So,
6,000 foot.
no, if you had a house that's already, let's just for conversation,
Yeah.
it's 3,000 feet on the ground, and it had a second floor, and it's an old antique house down here, let's stay in, so you've got 6,000 feet of your maximum footprint, or floor,
Gross floor.
area.
and somebody would still be able to, if you could meet all the other standards, come in and put a 6,000-foot, one-floor senior
Next to
housing
it?
building, yes.
Yeah.
Could they? I mean, what about the one principal?
Both, well, it depends on how you're defining the principle, it's both residential.
But
Well,
then-
what if-
The house would be senior housing.
And I mean, I'm asking the question because you're gonna wipe out a bunch of the places that you're entertaining if you don't consider this. You know, the pre-existing building problem.
Or we'll hold that thought,
Yeah.
but let's,
And, you know, the other issue is, what if you have, you know, just the shape of the lot, makes it more, likely to be able to do two buildings that are 6,000, brand new. You know, the only difference would be is that all of it would be senior housing and,
so the
And-
question we're not addressing is, are you allowed to have more than one senior housing building, or one senior housing building and a regular residential
that,
on a lot?
Could that not be a planned development?
well, that's where I'm kind of going, is that it's a, you know, when you look at the idea of mixed
Oh,
use.
you already have that in this area anyway.
Right, you know, you
can
have
do
mixed
that
use.
anyway.
And then, again, the same thing, we had talked about that, you know, if you have a building that has, you know, and I'm gonna use one of your buildings just because it's a good convenient building to use,
No,
Lyme Computer. Nice old building, it has commercial space in it right now. If you were to take and use that for commercial, and because you're allowed mixed use under this proposal, and you put in 2 units of senior housing in the back.
Well, yeah, I addressed that, and one of the things we talked about was that if you had a building in town, well, I don't wanna talk about your building,
No.
but a building like that building,
yeah.
but that you didn't own it,
Yeah.
okay? Somebody else owned it, but you had this big building with all business, but you wanna add on, and you qualify for it, you wanna add on 3 units of senior housing. You know, we address percentages of the mixed use in here, but I would say if you want to expand to add on the senior housing, and you're not gonna meet the threshold for the mixed use percentage, that shouldn't be a problem. If you follow, does people follow what I'm saying?
Yeah,
No?
so what's the threshold? The threshold is what?
Well, we,
That's 15%.
we said we had 2 different at one point. We had 50% if it was on 2 floors, and I think it was 100% if it was on one floor, or 80% on one floor.
80% residential,
Yeah,
residential,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
It just seems to me if you have a lot that has an existing use on it, that is commercial or even residential, I don't see an issue with allowing an expansion into senior housing that still falls into those.
An expansion. Yeah,
Right,
well,
yeah.
that, I don't have any problem with expansion, but getting to Rich's point about the planned development, planned development would allow you to have 2 on one
Yes.
lot. So we're not adding, we're just being consistent with things the way they are if we
Right.
do that.
The only difference is that now the senior housing, the dimensional controls are a little bit more relaxed.
A lot more relaxed.
But again, your constraints are going to be the space that you have to work with. You know, that's the
And-
huge,
And the other thing is, the planning board and site plan under this is gonna say, you know, in a ridiculous situation, we're just gonna say, no, you can't put up 2 airplane hangars here.
I think bringing the plan development in just complicates it, I think. the
No,
plan-
I don't mean, we won't.
Just for clarity.
Yeah.
So let that stand on its own. If somebody doesn't like senior housing and wanna do plan development, then go let them do that. It has
Exactly.
nothing to do with this.
No, I
And the
agree,
next thing-
I was just saying
Yeah,
that
no.
it's consistent with the current zoning, without calling it plan
Yeah.
development, allowing that is consistent with how the zoning is now in this district.
And the other thing that I think somebody mentioned was almost on the fringes of saying, well, you can't do it because it's two separate buildings, and I think there's almost a correlation between two separate buildings as being two houses. This is distinctly different because it's multiple dwelling units within a building here and a second building there, if somebody chose to do that. And if you're trying to make things fit into the character of the neighborhood, I can think of some lots in the common district where you wouldn't want one behemoth
Right.
building. You might rather it was broken up a little and have two separate.
Yeah, that's I was thinking you could easily, and this is when Rich asked the question, what it's gonna look like, my thing was, I could see 4 duplexes loosely connected with a common area, I could see triplexes, I could see, I mean, the sky's the limit really on how somebody
Let
wants
somebody else
to
have some imagination and see what they bring.
figure out a way to make this work and have it be marketable,
Yeah.
which is not everybody wants to live in a boxy
Right, he
thing,
was-
or in an old farmhouse, or whatever, but they might wanna be in a small unit attached to a big unit, and it looks like a regular house, and then there's another one of those.
Yeah, as
Right.
long as it's gonna be harmonious with the neighborhood.
Right.
Because I think from an aesthetic standpoint, in general, it's gonna be better to have more smaller buildings than one big, huge one. I guess that's what we're
It
saying.
would depend on the lot, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I realize we don't have any big, huge buildings, say, the warehouse over here,
Yeah.
but even still, it might look better as a big building, I wouldn't rule it out.
Right, but I'm just saying, in general,
Yeah.
it's probably, more from an aesthetic standpoint, it's,
Yeah.
you can do more, make it look better with smaller
I mean,
buildings.
that's something that, will come up in the way this is written with the dimensional controls. It's, a development in an area where it just dwarfs everything is not gonna fly.
Vicky had talked in the past, and it, kind of slipped a little bit in the site plan review, but, or I guess not in the site plan, but in the subdivision regulations, a required design review. And so,
Right.
I think for senior housing, I think it required design review.
Yeah, I see
Prior,
what you're saying.
that's something that would be written in the site plan regulations, not necessarily the ordinance.
Mhm.
I thought it was already there, we don't have site plan.
No, you have
No,
site,
no.
but this would be a
We don't have
required,
design
We don't have a design.
you don't have a design review.
That's
So you
something
would-
that Vicky wanted.
So having a design review for senior housing, having that requirement within the site plan, that would bring the developer in very early.
Early, so that, yeah, I mean, what we want to avoid is having a developer get to the third stage and then say, oops,
Sorry, not gonna have site plan.
Yeah,
yeah,
you wanna work with them through the whole
early,
process.
early.
And that, there tends to be a lot of people who say, I don't wanna do anything until I'm ready to go. And then all of a sudden they hit all these snags.
Okay,
Well,
so,
and that goes back to the character issue too.
Right,
It
that-
gives you a chance to do it sooner, and I've seen it many times where people have poured lots of money
Yeah, and
into
that's
design
what we
where
don't
they really
have.
should have spent a few hours
exactly.
discussing it in advance and
I
coming
mean,
and
what
being
I was-
offered some new ideas that'll save them a ton of money.
What I have later on, and I'll get to it, is that I was gonna say that an informal site plan review is recommended and a preliminary is required for senior housing. Precisely so we don't get ourselves or the builder, developer behind the 8 ball. And we can talk about the design review thing. Do you think the design review would be necessary if we're getting?
If you're doing a preliminary,
It's not.
it's not, that's basically all I'm looking for,
Okay.
is,
So I would just
require
require a
people to come up
preliminary and recommend an informal.
So in the preliminary, the developer would have to have his architectural plans?
No,
you'd have to have quite a bit of that down.
I'll read it to you when it says it, once I find it. Go ahead.
That's- that- I don't-
More conceptual.
I think it's more conceptual.
Yeah, but then it can change after that,
Well, yeah, but there's.
But if it changes between
Then
then
it's not
and the
what's
time
approved.
the board,
So here's the preliminary. If a person wishes a more detailed review of a project which goes beyond the discussion of the proposed site plan in conceptual form, he/she shall apply to the board in writing on blah, 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 blah. The preliminary review shall be conducted only at the meetings of the board. The board may review the proposal in detail and receive testimony in person or in writing from any applicant, any abutter, blah, blah, blah. A copy of the appropriate minutes of the board or such other communications of the board may be sufficient to report. The applicant may feel that the preliminary review by the board is not necessary. It doesn't really, it says it will be more detailed. That's all it says. It doesn't say specifically what.
I would suggest, anyway, going forward, is that in the site plan, have a specific section for senior housing and call out more of that. Just as a, and some, I think once, not once, if the town approves the change in ordinance, then I would go forward and make the changes to the site plan review, just to, make it clear,
Right.
very good point, people need to know upfront what they're going to be up against. And so here, we'll lay out, this is what we're going to expect for site plan review.
Right.
And, not that we wanna cause impediments, we wanna work with people.
Well, that was Vicky's point, was that you set it up so that you're working together as opposed cross purpose.
In the lore of regulatory review, the times when the regulators cause the developer to spend more money and do things more onerously get all the press. And the times when the regulator tells them, here's a more efficient way to achieve what you want to do, that's quicker and easier and has less impact, get almost no press.
Right.
Because people don't want to admit to it.
It's not-
It's not an
And,
issue.
and,
It's just
and
not an
I've
issue.
I've witnessed it enough times where I actually had a little tally sheet going. And it's about equal, you know?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
just,
you only get the bad news.
you get the bad rep, and you don't get the good rep where somebody says, wow, you could do the same thing and it would be
So,
more efficient if you did it this way.
I agree. So the dimensional controls,
Yeah.
I read that to you, and we're adding, under no circumstances shall the gross floor area and the BF, the building footprint, exceed 12,000 square feet. Is that what we said?
I've got a question though.
Okay.
Hopefully it's not too much of a rabbit trail. When we went through this exercise with respect to the lot size and septic, didn't we come up with some of the biggest, there were numbers I remember there, nowhere as close to 10 or 12 units that it wouldn't support. There wasn't a piece of property that would support more than,
Well, that comes back to some of what we've talked about before, is the lot through the septic system is gonna control
exactly.
the size of these.
But-
And with John's thought of the averaging of 9 units,
Yep.
you're controlling again the size of the building without even going to the numbers you have in the zoning ordinance, septic rules.
But you were saying, I think if I understand what you were saying, you're saying nothing would qualify for 10.
Right.
Well, it would.
The other thing is, well, let me back up.
Actually, what we looked for was, we were looking for properties under current zoning that could go to the maximum, which was 6. And we found those properties. What David and I did subsequently is, okay, we know that, but that's not really helpful because we're talking about 10 units. And then we narrowed down what properties would support 10 units.
From a septic perspective?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Now,
Because I remember the 6 number.
because we only went to 6, that's why.
but the other thing to remember that we were basing that on 350 gallon per day per unit for septic. Senior housing, if you have 2 residents, 2-bedroom maximum, 2-resident maximum, the state only says 125 gallon per day.
So that's a big difference.
So you have a huge drop in the septic load. Because John kept on interrupting me.
one of the things, this all comes full circle though, because when somebody was talking about wanting to be able to have a full-time caregiver living in here, that changes the septic
Right,
load.
that does
It comes
change.
back to the choices that the builder makes and how the buildings are regulated.
Yeah, if they site load, or have the septic loaded for 2-bedroom, 2-resident only,
But
then.
that's their choice.
Two
Then-
senior
well, but
residents,
two
senior
senior
residents, 'cause they're
residents, yes,
different
two
than.
senior residents, then they can't have a caregiver,
Right.
because the septic, yeah, and so that's something that,
But a builder could build an extra unit or two less and increase his septic to account for it,
Right.
builder's choice.
Right,
Exactly.
And you don't wanna be in there dictating that stuff.
right,
No,
Okay.
but you know, you drive you crazy, you know, I mean.
Yeah, I agree.
yeah. Plus it's
So,
too-
No, that helps
are we
me.
still on
I-
dimensional controls?
We can be.
Okay, because I think I wanted to remove the planning board from this. That the dimensional controls, lot coverage, and all these things shall meet the requirements of site plan review.
No,
No?
the site
because
plan
the
doesn't-
planning board it determines,
Yeah.
it's still the same, it
So
says the
how
same
does the,
thing.
Site plan review is a regulation, it's not an ordinance, it's a regulation.
Yes.
It is, it's very similar to the subdivision regulations. The
Mhm.
planning board sets the rules. When they wanna change the rules, they change the rules, go to
Yes.
public hearing,
Right,
have a public hearing,
right, the rules have changed, right?
right. So, if you set it in the zoning ordinance, the planning board cannot change it. It is set in stone until the town approves something different.
Right.
And so you're basically, if you take, you know, anytime you make set something in the zoning ordinance, it's
Yeah.
basically set in stone and is immovable until the town decides it's movable. Site plan, you could get a board that decides they want to, just go absolutely crazy.
The
No,
board could
but-
change the rules either way, let's not be
Right.
prejudicial.
Well, absolutely, and
Right.
in this way, they, you know,
Mhm.
it's clearly stating in the ordinance that the board gets to make the decision.
And I think our discussion shows why it's necessary for the board to have that authority and leeway.
Right.
Which is why you come in with your ideas early, and you
Exactly.
work through it, so you get to the point where either my idea is not workable and I haven't invested too much money yet, or you keep working until you get to a point where you're feeling confident that now this is gonna work.
Right. Well, when both the board and the developer
Agreed. Yeah.
feel like, yeah, now we're in the ballpark.
Right.
But doesn't the board have to fall back on the terms of the ordinance and the site plan review
Yeah.
process?
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm not sure what your question is.
I mean, why must it say that it be established by the planning board? How does the planning board establish
It's,
any of this?
there's language in that in the ordinance already.
That-
Well,
Lot
again,
size,
as
everything.
we've been talking about, all the lots in the Lyme Common District are different, so you can't, setting a standard for all the lots
Mhm.
is difficult.
It's impossible, I tried it, I mean, really based on
Sure.
what you were saying.
So the idea is that a developer comes in and says, okay, I can get X number of gallons per day in a septic
Mhm.
with a building footprint of this and this number of units.
Mhm.
And so the board looks at that and says, hey, that makes kind of good sense, but you're building right up to the property line, and the next building's too close. The fire department's not gonna like that, we need you to, we
But
don't
how
think-
does the board, how is the board informed as to you're too close? It's in either the ordinance, in the setbacks, or it's in the site plan regs.
well, it is,
I'm
Well,
just
yeah,
saying, why do we need to say the planning board?
because it gives the
Establish
board,
it.
Because it states, it's a statutory stated authority. that's why.
You're giving the planning board the authority to make that
To
call.
use judgment, to use its judgment.
Right.
Just like when you go to the zoning board and you try to get a special exception, the zoning board has all, you know, all these criteria, but they're interpreting them through their judgment.
Better to have the town interpret it through their judgment, because it brings flexibility, because the other way, you're dead in the water,
Yeah.
you know, so, I mean, if you
Yeah.
have,
Right.
you know,
I tried, you know, I heard what you said, and I tried to come up, the only thing I could think of that, you know, definitely is needed is a maximum GFA. And now we have the building footprint too. But when I thought about the different lots, there's no way to have a single
But,
standard.
but the board can be no more permissive than the ordinance states or the site plan regs state.
But it
But
can be
I think-
stricter.
well, I think you.
Well, that's right.
Right, it can be stricter,
Yes.
so that what it means is we could say, you know, we're gonna give you this favor over here because we're
Mhm.
trying to be flexible, but in return, you're gonna have to have a bigger setback over here.
And that's, and- but it's,
For
but it's-
instance,
but it's
which
not
is-
true that we can't be more permissive, because, just like in lot size averaging, it's a, you know, we can adjust, as you were saying, it's not just restrictive, we can say, in this case, we're actually better off going into this setback than not, something like that. So
Okay.
it's not
If you-
So-
just negative.
You know, if you set the setback, say, okay, we're gonna stick to the 20-foot setback, and you find that you could get this building, you know, by encroaching a little bit into that setback, giving the planning.
One corner.
One corner, you know,
Yeah.
you have two
Right, right,
choices now, you know,
Mhm.
right now, if you wanted to do that, you would be at the planning board, you would be dead in the water, because the planning board would say, we think it's a great idea, we have no problems doing that, but the zoning ordinance says
Mhm.
20-foot setback. The
Right.
only way you're going to get into that setback is now to stop the process, go to the zoning board,
Sure.
get a variance or a special exception or whatever you
Whichever
need,
applies, yes.
and then come back.
Mhm.
And so this way, you're really streamlining the process by saying the planning board has the authority to look at these situations and, same way as the zoning board, make the call.
Hmm.
And it's.
I wasn't aware of that.
It would make, you know.
Well, we have it in, I think it's in lots, well, it's clearly in lot size averaging, I think it's in Article 11, where we can adjust various dimensional controls.
But the applicant has recourse too, right? If they don't,
If they believe that the planning board has made a mistake in their interpretation of the
Right.
zoning ordinance, then they have a recourse with the zoning board. If not, then
right,
it would go to,
it's just interpretation.
it's just interpretation. But I think it really does allow for streamlining the process. You know, again, the board can say during a preliminary, say, yeah, we don't have a problem with you moving this a little bit into the setback because, you know, when you look back there, it's all wetlands and there's no one who's going to be building a house into that setback. It's not going to affect anything. Great. But as the current situation is, you would then need to say, well, you're going to need a special exception, another trip to the board, you know, the zoning board, another month delay.
Oh, I'm quite aware of this dance, thank you.
Yeah, and that really
And-
is, maybe your point of view, it's, I think, a pretty big ability not to have to do that.
Oh, yeah, but I think the other thing to not lose sight of is that this changes a lot of those requirements and makes them more lenient.
Yep.
So, you know, what's to complain about, you know?
Well, I think that's the point, is that
And
looking
even-
at,
and even if-
looking at this article as onerous to a developer,
I don't see it.
I don't see it at all. What this is providing, you know, you're getting twice the GFA. It's a great expansion in what can be done. But what comes with that is that the planning board needs to be able to be sure that what's being done is okay. So you get this, but you also get that.
And the thing that the planning board has, a little more, I don't wanna say authority, but when you look at, going through site plan review, you do have, more ability to negotiate. The zoning board, they're going to look at the specific thing you're asking for. You wanna set this building in the setback. Here's our criteria. They're not going to be looking at and saying, well, here's our criteria, but we're gaining over here.
And here's the trade-off of other functions and values of the site, which is what we're trying to.
And here's how
So the
everybody,
planning board
here's
is-
how everybody wins.
Right, the planning board can look at it as a whole,
Mhm.
whereas the zoning board can only be looking at.
Sure, they have to look at the strict language, yes.
Right,
And frankly, I think so far, everybody, I don't think there's anybody on the board who thinks that senior housing is bad. We may have different ideas of what it should be. And all the people who have come to the meetings have, nobody said, we don't like senior, we think it's a terrible thing. But this is gonna go to the town,
Mhm.
and we're gonna have to defend this to the town.
Mhm.
And we're not only gonna have to defend it to people who don't think it's lenient enough, we're gonna have to defend it to people who thinks it's way too lenient. And I think one major reassurance is that the planning board has this authority.
Good, let's move on.
Love to. Okay, I think we're all the way to F. Okay, this is maximum number of units, I don't think we
The
should just.
random number pulled out.
Well,
has
you-
already
you-
I
been
mean, clearly
struck.
that gets struck.
Yeah,
That's already been
that's
struck.
pretty struck.
So, if the building is entirely on one floor, this is just a suggestion,
Mhm.
I'm not,
Oh, so
Yeah.
back to F though,
Yeah.
do we even need a no instance? I mean, you're sort of restating the math that's already given.
yeah, I don't think we had said,
You didn't
because
cut-
we hadn't determined, when David wrote this, it wasn't for sure.
Right, so I mean, if the 2,000, or excuse me, 12,000 is the firm number, and the max is 1,200, then it's 10.
Then you're done, yeah.
And the
So-
average
so-
is 9, then
Um,
it
Go
works
ahead.
itself out.
The only thing that I would say, is, the maximum number of units and then mixed use. So,
Yeah, so it's different.
right, and the planning board decides whether you get the 10 or not.
Mhm.
So,
Okay,
Good, no, it's a good point.
okay.
it, it does put in a little bit of
I'm
a
good.
catch.
So how does the planning board determine?
Well,
That's-
let's do that now. We're the planning board,
Yes, okay.
so let's determine it. This is just provisional.
No, I mean, so we write a number down and, maybe it's 10, maybe
Maybe
it's
it's 10.
9, maybe it's whatever, but once this is embodied in the ordinance,
Yeah.
how does the planning board determine the actual number
That-
that a developer gets?
I think that goes back to the site plan review, the preliminary, when the developer comes and says, we want to do this. And the planning board can look at the plan and just say, based on the buildings next door, across the street, this is way too big. You need to, and then, your septic. You barely have the septic, don't have the parking. So there are criteria that in the site plan that's going to drive that, and if you have,
Actually, that's a really good example. Say somebody comes in and they say, we don't have the square footage, so we're gonna do 10 600 square foot units,
Mhm.
but they gotta have parking. So now you're gonna say, well, nice idea, but you're not gonna fit 10 of those in there.
There's so many
and be
things
able
that-
to And be able to do
Yeah.
parking and do other things. So you meet the
So-
square footage, but you're just.
So
not
instead
gonna-
of 10,
You get-
you might be able to do 8.
Exactly. or 6 or
And
something.
it all comes back to the lot, really.
right, and it's really, again, as you keep saying,
There's so,
the
yeah.
lot is really the defining factor of everything. You know, when, that size of that lot, the configuration of the lot.
And the location of
And
the
the
lot.
location of that lot is going to define so much of this. And, you know, without, you know,
So,
seeing that, you know, people come to me all the time and say, you know, what can I build on my lot? And I say, well, what plan do you have? You know, show me what you want and we'll talk. Me just sitting here and saying, well, you can do this, you can do this, you can do that.
It's too general.
It's too general and my imagination is not that great. And somebody else could come up with something that's still workable, that everyone likes, that nobody else has thought of. So it gives you that flexibility to say,
so
yes or no.
one question about the 50% business, which we talked about earlier, and unfortunately, I own a property that we used as an example. If you had a building like that, it has, normal residential on the second floor, has businesses on the first floor, and the person comes in and says, look, I'd like to put whatever the number of units is, it's a large lot, and put them over on the other end of that parking lot. If the senior housing doesn't end up being 50% because of lot support issues, be it parking, septic, setbacks, or whatever, and say you can only put 2 in, well, 2 isn't gonna be 50%, so you're gonna tell that guy, no, we're not gonna do any?
I think the way you solve that is, the portion of the development that's senior housing gets restricted, not the existing.
Yeah.
So you're
that's-
saying-
But then we wouldn't meet, you wouldn't, I think there was
Yeah,
something
yeah,
about the
so
50% wouldn't.
one of the things I wrote down here was that if you wanted, a circumstance like that, if you wanted to, you could get 2 or 3 units and you wanted them to be senior housing, but that then didn't meet whatever criteria, which we haven't set.
You have the flexibility.
Well, no, I would say,
Planning board.
well, we could leave it that it's flexible, or we could even say something that, the mixed use would be waived in an expansion
Yeah.
of an existing building if all of the added units were dedicated to senior
Yeah,
housing.
I hear what you're saying, I'm not picking it apart, I agree with what you're saying. But in an existing building, it's different terms somewhere in there, because it might be separate buildings. But I agree.
If you just say
Okay,
the
I
agree
existing-
with
I see
you.
what you're
Existing development.
Yeah, the
There you
existing
go,
development.
something like that.
Existing
Yeah.
development, okay.
But I think that
No, but that.
works
I think
out that
works.
what you're looking at is the expansion on the lot.
Yeah,
So you have
so if somebody's trying to expand the
pre-existing
lot,
use,
yeah,
that can be maintained. And then you can add senior housing, all this would,
that would be a large incentive if you wanted senior housing, you might not get, 10 units and the
No,
problem
but
solved.
the
But
3 would be-
piecemeal, you might
Yeah.
get
if you
those.
get 3 units on 10 different
Yeah,
lots.
exactly.
You now have 30 units of senior housing, which is not bad.
No.
That would be remarkable, frankly.
I realized I took a note a while back. I think our discussion is presumed that you might have multiple buildings. David, you were talking about having, duplexes or triplexes and multiples of those on a parcel. I never read this to say that was a choice. And yet, it's clearly, you thought.
I never read it the other way.
I was just gonna say,
assumed-
does it say it's not a choice?
Well, I'll step back, and the zoning ordinance is permissive.
Right,
It
right.
says,
We should state it.
yeah, if you want it, you should state it. If it doesn't say it, it doesn't mean you can do it.
Right.
So, if there is something,
Okay.
absolutely, that it should be, because it's a permissive ordinance, it should state what,
But I think you also wanna be careful, because,
Yeah.
if you have a 2-acre lot in town here, nothing on
Yeah.
duplex, it's conversation, but it's not gonna look right.
No,
And that may come back to planning board says, doesn't look right.
yeah.
no, but if you were.
But if you had a 10-acre piece, maybe it does.
Exactly,
But-
exactly. It made
yeah.
it more like a little neighborhood rather than,
Right.
So
rather
it-
than a single,
it-
single building.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
so that's something we need to think about, how and whether we want to address that explicitly.
I think it should be addressed, and I think, My own personal opinion, and it doesn't count, I know that, but,
No, what do you mean it doesn't
well,
count?
I'm not a member of the board.
Yeah, we'd never listen to you.
Having the ability to place it in other buildings or multiple buildings on a lot provides a huge amount of flexibility. It also, I think in some cases, can maintain the look and feel of the Lyme Common, because right now, a lot of the buildings are very close to the road. And so you put a couple of senior housing units in another building in the back, you may not know they even exist, unless you really look for them. So I think it would, you know, to specifically
Little house,
say.
big house, back house, barn.
Yeah, and, you know, and we had talked about the concept of granny pods,
Right,
where, I don't know if what they are, is they're basically a prefab house that you.
tiny.
Tiny house, they bring it in on a truck, drop it on your front yard, you connect your sewer, your water, and your mother-in-law lives there until she passes away, then you picked it up and take it away. You know, it's, the ability to have an extra building. And I think that there are some people, you know, even if you did one unit of senior housing as a, you know, you could do an ADU, but I think the senior housing would, again, give you more flexibility
It's a lot more
even
flexible.
than the ADU. You're going to give more incentive for that. So I think multiple
So you
buildings.
say somewhere, nothing in this, to be clear, from Rich's standpoint, nothing in this prohibits multiple buildings as long as.
They conform to the rest of.
It somehow, and I don't think it's proper wording, but somehow or other, but it needs to meet with the discretion of the board.
Yes.
Because I can think of a number of scenarios or layouts where you wouldn't want the salt and pepper dinky little houses all over the back. lawn.
Right.
Oh,
right.
exactly.
So there'd still have to be some discretion. But, yeah, well, let's not, I'd like to get through this whole thing, but that's a good point, and I think we do have to come up with language, so thank you. All right, so let's get to F and move this thing along here.
So, we're pretty definite with 10, right? We're gonna stay with, I mean, I think
It's the
fine.
board's, I'm okay with 10, but if people
Yeah, I'm
feel it
okay
should be
with-
different.
I was thinking we should decide, if, you know, 'cause it's pretty.
I was
basic.
just going with 10, because that's what,
Yeah.
how many people object to 10? Or object is the wrong word, how many people are uneasy with 10?
Would like another number.
Okay, I don't hear any, I
You
don't,
know, I'm gonna be the designated bad guy here,
Okay.
and just, I think this is an overly prescriptive ordinance, I think it won't be attractive, but go ahead. I mean, the vote's 4-1, I'm okay with
oh,
that.
but you feel like 10 is too little.
I think this is a very difficult thing, I'm gonna disagree with you, Brett.
Well, first off, on the small in-town lots, you're gonna end up with septic constraint anyway, you can have it 30
Sure.
and it won't matter. And as soon as somebody gets to a bigger lot, they
Mhm.
come in and see you and get a subdivision, now they got 20. Okay? And if they don't have the lot to begin with, and they don't get the subdivision, they don't get the 20.
Right, and.
So you can get there if you have the lot.
And I would say to the board,
What?
Hadn't thought about subdivision part.
yeah, I would say to the board, if this is senior housing, if we're espousing it, and if we're advocating for it, and somebody was actually able to build 20 units of senior housing and thought he could make money, thought they would get filled, thought they would serve needs of people in town, why would that be bad?
Well, on the same, I mean, it's through exaggeration, but just to make the point, if somebody felt that they could provide senior housing in a skyscraper because they could make money, that doesn't mean that because we favor senior housing, we would think that a skyscraper would be good in the common.
Well, I think.
So we're drawing a line,
Mhm.
Septic's
we
gonna
have
fill it
to.
anyway.
But-
which we have to somewhere.
Well, but we don't permit skyscrapers in Lyme. I mean,
And we're not permitting more than 10, so that's the line
and
we're
if-
drawing.
And if you had 2 units, if you had a parcel that could support, get subdivided and have 2 developments of 10 senior housing units, and
Well, then conceivably, you could do it on one, couldn't you?
Well,
Well, if you subdivided.
If you
do it-
subdivided, then you get
Do it
your
on 2
20.
units,
You get
and you
to
get your
20.
20.
Right.
So,
so,
and would that be bad? Why would
Not
that-
if it qualified,
Okay,
and it's written so that that could
Right.
happen.
Yeah,
okay.
you did, there's, you know, you come in, you get a subdivision, and then you put,
But, okay, anyway, I don't wanna get held up, we're still on F, so let's move this thing along.
Okay.
If the building is entirely on one floor, and this is, I'm not suggesting, this is just language to work from, based on what we said last time. If the building is entirely on one floor, a minimum of 80% of the units shall be senior housing units. If the building has more than a single floor, a minimum of 50% of the units shall be senior housing and located on the ground floor.
Try me one more time, because that was it
Right.
last week. last
If
week.
the building is entirely on one floor, let me read the other part of F. Well, this is really just, okay. If the building is entirely on one floor, a minimum of 80% of the units shall be senior housing units. If the building has more than a single floor, a minimum of 50% of the units shall be senior housing and located on the ground floor. So in other words, the second floor could be all, you know, businesses, off that. I mean, we may have to say something like low impact,
Heavy equipment manufacturing.
Yeah, right.
child daycare is
But I'm
probably
not-
not the.
right.
I'm not sure if we should limit the senior housing just to the first floor.
Okay,
I mean, I think that's pretty limiting.
Well, I don't know that it is limiting, and then you get back to some of the things we talked about before. I'm not sure this fire department's, yeah, we can get Hanover to come up here and dig them out of the building, but you start having people having a hard time getting around, dragging them out the window, I'm not sure you're gonna be very happy about that. I just wouldn't put seniors on a second floor in this
Yeah,
town.
well, I'm just thinking of the rest of the country. I mean, I've seen, my
Yeah.
mother
Yeah,
was
they
in
have their own fire
several
departments and
nursing
their own-
homes, and they, you know, everybody was on the second floor and third floor even, you know.
I don't feel strongly about it.
I think you'll find a life safety issue, I think.
Yeah, I
Do
think
as you choose.
that's a good point.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, I don't disagree with you.
Well, how does the
I'm
board
just thinking
hold-
about from a developer standpoint, if it's too limiting.
But it's not,
Force it.
you don't want this great big thing anyway. You end up with a
Wouldn't
big-
code,
Yeah.
wouldn't code,
Well, there's
cover
people
that?
in second floor now, but the code doesn't really take into effect that we don't have a ladder truck in this town.
I think you go back to our purpose, which is we're talking about safety, accessibility, some of these other words that we threw around up there. And a lot of that puts me, you'd have to have a really, really, really good reason why you need to be on the second floor. And I don't think we need to permit it out of the box. That I really think it would be wise to say, for a variety of reasons, keeping these on the first floor and not tempt developers to try to come up with ways to do it that we then end up regretting.
Yeah, well, they could have common areas on the second floor, I guess.
Sure they can.
All that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and that's
right.
where the pool hall is.
Right,
But,
yeah.
but I think having the residential
Dance
units
floor
on the
above my
first floor.
apartment. Dance floor, it's above my.
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
I don't know, I could argue and debate it both ways.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we've got homes with bedrooms, children, second floor.
and old people.
And old people, second floor. I can't state exactly what the response time is for Hanover versus Lyme. You know, the fact that this is, generally speaking, accessible via Route 10, and they're there 24/7 versus our guys that have to get called out. You know, I don't know, I don't know if that's a
So you always have
necessary.
gravity on your favor, once you get them over.
Yeah, but I just don't know if that's a strong, if the safety aspect is that strong of an argument to put it into here. I get the logic behind it in a
Well-
perfect, in a perfect world, in a
Yeah,
perfect
I
world.
agree
Something
with
to
you.
remember about responses, that the fire department works with Hanover Dispatch, so that, recently there was a plane that went off the end of the runway at Lebanon.
Uh-huh.
And the Lebanon dispatcher immediately called Hartford, Lebanon, Hanover, Enfield. All those departments were called out before they even knew what was going on. And the same thing would happen, you know, with Mike Mundy if he had a house or a building that was all senior housing. If a fire alarm came in for that building, Hanover's ladder truck would be on its way. So that truck would be rolling more likely than not, than any of the Lyme units.
Yeah,
No,
and
before
10
any-
to 12 minutes, probably they could be here.
I think they can move that truck pretty quick.
That's what I mean, 10 to 12
But
minutes.
So it's,
the point here is we're trying to encourage people to design things for senior housing. And I just don't know whether we need to be, you know, designing them right now to the second floor.
So if we took out that requirement for, that they be on the first floor, the reasoning for the 50% mix was because we assumed everything would be on the second floor. If we took that out, we might wanna,
So you'd end up with businesses on the first floor and seniors on the second.
no, if you
Well-
can't, you gotta have.
Well, you said 50%, so I'll put
Right.
50% business on the first
Yeah,
floor.
well, that's why I'm
and I'll
saying,
put 50%
that's why I'm
seniors on
saying
the second.
50% would have to go. You couldn't have 50% because you'd end up with too big a mix of business with the senior housing, and it could be anywhere on the,
No, and I'm not,
don't be shy, you don't have to
what
preface it.
number are you thinking? You trying to think about raising or lowering the number?
Then I would lower the number of
So
mixed.
20%,
Yeah, like 20%.
and the 20% is which side? Seniors, 20%?
No, 20% would be the mixed use, you know, the business or whatever. It's because we have 80
Yeah.
if it's on the first floor.
Yeah,
So if you're gonna have seniors on the second floor, I would keep it at 80. But it sounds like, well, let's take a vote so we can move this thing.
Right.
How many people want, I'm with Kevin, I'm a little bit, I don't know. But how many people are sure they want it all on the first floor? How many people are sure they want 2 floors?
Well, I didn't know if you raised your hand, I was just
Yeah,
looking
you
at
did, you
it.
did. How many people are sure they want 2 floors?
Now, I wanna say, code at some point calls for sprinklers. Just
Okay, let's keep this short.
But-
How many
so-
people want 2 floors?
2 floors.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
should clearly be
So-
two floors.
What did you say?
I'm raising my hand for 2 floors.
Okay.
So, yeah. I mean, another consideration that may be a consideration is a view, you know, like, some seniors might wanna be on the second floor for a great view also.
Okay, I'm gonna move this along. We're not fully decided. We're leaning towards 2. You haven't decided, I haven't decided, and Vicky's not here.
and to answer your question about sprinkler, if you're going to be doing multifamily, multi-unit, you're gonna sprinkle it. That's, single-family duplex, the state doesn't require that. It actually tells you that you can't require it in the zoning ordinance. But once you start to get to multifamily, then
And you can,
the state's gonna
the
require
state
it.
is,
I wouldn't even put it in the ordinance because
the state.
the state fire codes are gonna start requiring it. And
Okay,
you're gonna have to start getting inspections from the state for those buildings.
okay. So, we're gonna have to revisit that. G, I don't think is practical, which is, I don't think it's legal.
H.
H.
H, I'm sorry. I got too many pieces of paper here. Anyway, H is, here. I don't think we can say that, we can limit the ownership like that. Is there a disagreement?
So I guess you're saying they could be condos. Is that sort of?
I just, I
Absolutely could be condos.
I think so.
I guess that's what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I don't think we can say that they have to be, I know you can say it if you have a retirement community, and that's for good reason. You have to have a single ownership, but I don't think you're allowed to do that.
I don't know all the intricacies of how Berkshire Apartments evolved.
Which
But I
one?
know What was known as the Berkshire Apartments, the condos on the back of the common.
Oh,
But there was quite a lot of wrangling about that. It might be worth at least a phone call to the attorney to find out, because I think that there is the ability to restrict that, but I don't know that for sure.
I can
Why
fire.
why don't you find out about that? All right. So here's one for, again, I'll duck my head after I say it, and let me give you a preface before I read it, just so that I stand a chance, okay? One thing I'm concerned about is being sensitive to the people who are living here on the common, and people who love the look of the common. And I'm concerned about, well, I'll just stop there and I'll read you what I wrote. Any existing building or structure abutting or directly across from Lyme Common or the Little Lyme Common may be developed as a senior housing development under Article 13 solely through conversion or expansion. In other words, you can't tear down a building to put up a new building. Is that okay? No? I'm just talking about the ones,
Yeah, no, I know what you.
So just the ones that.
just the ones abutting or facing the common.
Unfortunately, I mean, if I was thinking about developing and I was to think about some of the houses that you're referencing,
You don't need to tear them down.
we don't need to, but at the end of the day, it might be so difficult to maintain what you've got to gain anything worth renting.
I can tell you that based on our
Go ahead.
yeoman's research, there are 2 properties around that would come under this definition, and neither of them would suffer from this in terms of if they wanted to do senior housing.
Two.
I'd really rather not
Okay.
discuss.
Okay, no, I didn't mean a specific one, but you're telling me that,
They're big buildings, if it wouldn't be a detriment to them converting or expanding. But tearing them down would be very damaging. So it's not that you know, the owner could tear them down tomorrow, but we're saying, if you're doing that, so I don't wanna encourage the tear downs.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think it's just out of respect for what we have here on the common.
Yeah, as a member of the Heritage Commission, I totally agree with
All right, anybody have a problem with it?
Well,
I was
except-
thinking beyond comment, that was.
No,
part-
no, it's
no,
just
part-
the comment.
So that was part of what I was thinking, was beyond just
So,
within the reach or.
so these are uncommon or the little common, they can be expanded
They can be expanded and they can
solely
be converted.
through converted or expansion.
Yeah, you can't,
You can do senior housing, you can't
Through-
tear them down
Okay.
and build a new house. You got that?
that's exactly
it.
right.
Okay,
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's.
okay? All right, I'll survive that one. A minimum, this is another thing, a minimum of 1 parking space per dwelling unit shall be provided. All parking spaces must be off-street but with direct access thereto. No parking spaces shall be located within the front setback, okay?
It's more lenient than I think this so-called state definition, somewhere you, I think, saw the same thing, or you and I talked about it.
Oh.
I think that there's some regulatory body that says a parking space and a half per unit.
I think,
which allows
and
for guests or
I'm
something.
not certain, but I'm pretty sure with senior housing that it can be 1. I saw that somewhere, but again,
Neither here nor there. It's more lenient then, so,
yeah, and the more strict one
Yeah.
will apply, but I think that's
well, I don't know
okay.
that, anyway, you're all good.
So just thinking of what has happened, how do we keep from the front yard street becoming parking? Is that good enough?
Site plan review. You look at it, you're looking at the whole site, you're not just looking at the structure, and if they say, well, we're gonna put all the parking out on the street. The board's saying, no,
Well, we're saying that.
Right,
Okay.
It's,
Because
all
we struggle
parking,
a little bit with that now.
Still doesn't mean on a busy Sunday afternoon that you
Yeah.
won't have cars on the street.
right,
yeah.
Yeah,
Because you
that-
will.
No, just as long as it's.
but if you give tickets, you won't.
Yeah.
I actually think you might be wise to do the space and a half, because some of these senior couples are gonna have 2 cars, some are not.
Yeah, I
And what
just,
you're gonna end up with, though, is like you're saying.
Every time you have a visitor,
Well, it's not even that, they'll be parking out on the street anyway.
yeah.
I think you probably should.
What does the board think?
Well, so in a 10-unit, so that would be 10
15
as
cars.
opposed to, or 15 as opposed to 10.
Yeah, I mean, it starts to take up a lot of,
Space, but
You know what I want?
unfortunately, when they don't have the space, guess where they end up?
all right, so what does the board wanna do?
Especially when we're talking about the common district, because that's the place
No,
where we got
I
some
get
good
your point, yeah.
Yeah,
So we'll say one or 1.5 for now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, some seniors may not have
It's
a
split
car
the
at
difference
all.
and go 1.25 for, on average, but it just means you're gonna have to have a few extra spots. I just know every time I get on my mother-in-law's place, they don't have enough parking, and you know, there's no, they didn't plan it that way, everybody's got their spots used up, you end up having to park
All right, so let's
on
go,
the street
let's go
somewhere
1.5.
else, and it's a royal pain,
Is it, people okay with
especially when
1.5?
people are visiting. So,
We've already, I mean, I'll just say
No, I
this,
agree.
matter of factly, we've already got parking issues all throughout this area of town.
I think you'd be smart to do 1.5 because of that reason,
Right,
because there are parking
Okay.
issues.
right, and you can never have enough parking.
Okay,
I mean,
1.5.
It's,
Because then you'd be looking at 270 square feet for gravel parking lot. Um, Oh, I'm sorry, 200 square feet for unpaved. So you'd be looking at, let me recalculate that.
2,500
is that
with 1.5,
15 cars would be 30,000 square feet.
30, 30?
Well, 15 spaces.
That's
is
300
2,000.
square feet per space times 10 units is 3,000 square feet.
Right.
It's 4,500 if it's 1.5. Oh,
No,
it's
that's-
200 per.
200, so
unit
3,
Per, okay,
1.5 is the 300.
right. Yes, so
300,
4,500.
300 per. Okay. All senior housing must comply with applicable HUD and ADA requirements. I mean, we may wanna have town council provide that language.
Sure.
Okay, the owner of any senior housing unit or building shall be responsible for supplying proof of residence age to the town. The select board shall be responsible for enforcement and must act within 14 days of notification of a violation. I know you'd like that part.
That's where it all falls.
Right,
Um,
so this is, you're adding these, this is J, I, and J.
These are extra ones,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm way down the alphabet.
Okay.
All right, we already did the,
Can I get everyone to register with dogs? I'm not sure how we're gonna enforce that.
Your midnight
Sean
bed
do a
checks.
bed check every night.
Yeah, bed
yeah.
check.
well, I mean, the thing is that this is stating that the onus is on, not on the select board.
I get, I,
On the, right.
It's,
I get it.
it's on the owner.
The question I would have is if you have condo ownership,
Mhm.
then, you know, I think in that case, you would then wanna make sure that it's in the condo association documents
Right.
that prohibit it there.
Yes, I
Which
mean,
is,
that's
which
what
is
the.
why you wanna put it, you wanna
Right,
be
so-
explicit.
Right, that's why the HUD regulations say it is the responsibility of the owner or management of the facility.
So we need to
That's
get that
responsible.
language.
Right.
Um, Yeah, and this I already mentioned is to suggest, recommend rather, a site plan review, informal and require a preliminary. Yeah, I think that's it. So, there's a few things we have to nail down, but how's everybody, I mean, I know, Rich, you feel this is too prescriptive, but how does everybody feel about it?
I think we're getting close.
Yeah,
So, I guess you should get this written up and, you know.
And then you can
somehow-
send it to everyone.
Yeah.
We have 3 weeks until our next meeting?
Yes, and I am out next week.
Okay,
So I have to try to get the minutes written up tomorrow to meet the 5 days. So I'm not gonna have time tomorrow to write up,
Yeah,
plus I have
you're not
website
gonna,
and
you're not
stuff.
gonna have it tomorrow. You're not gonna have it until you're back from your week off, because I'm not gonna have
Perfect.
it done. All right, I genuinely like to thank everybody for their work tonight, and thank you for,
Yeah, it's been
you've
good.
really, it's been so, seriously, been very helpful to have you here, so thank you for helping us.
It's amazing how many, if you don't have somebody who's really been through the ringer on some of these things,
Yeah.
how off base, well-intended,
Yeah,
things can be.
for sure.
And it really helps to have somebody who's got a firm stick in the ground in
Oh,
terms of
about that.
reality. Or having tried to do these kinds of things before, because you end up with a lot of unintended consequences,
So,
even if you think you did it well.
John, I am gonna ask, for some information about those 10 or 13 parcels that you identified.
You could talk to David about it.
Good, thank you.
When I get back from vacation. I'm sorry, I have to keep saying that, but
Yep.
I know, no,
Yes, I understand.
I have
Good.
stuff, that,
And I would add, with all of us, to be sensitive to David's time, so make it efficient.
I-
And David, if he doesn't make it efficient, tell him when it's becoming inefficient.
That's fair.
I don't think, just as a general thing, you want a prescriptive list where somebody walks in and says, yeah, I've got the 10 items I'm in, because
No, no.
it's the road to ruin from the town's point
Yeah,
of view.
it's undoable. I mean, I really, Rich, you know, was asking for that, and I really sat down. I gave a lot of time to try, and there was just no way to do it. The only thing I could come up with was the maximum GFA and FB.
Right, in fact, that's kind of what I was.
BF, I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
BS, the maximum BS. No, there are no ladies. Gentlemen, you wanna start your engines?
Also move.
Please. Second and whatever.
Thank you.
Again, thanks to everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for your work.
Making progress,
We're moving.
if I may speak in Canadian. Progress.
Progress.